Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us here at Hellenic-American Cultural Center and Museum from wherever you are. My name is Brandon Baker. I am the executive director here at the Hellenic-American Cultural Center and Museum. Just joined this past spring, thrilled to be with you here tonight, enjoying every moment. We are sad that we can't be together in person, but we feel very fortunate that we do have this technological ability here to join via Zoom. Hellenic-American Cultural Center Museum, as you hopefully know, we gather, preserve, and share the Hellenic-American experience here in the Pacific Northwest. And this program is being brought to you tonight free of charge because that's part of who we are. That's what we believe, is that we should be able to bring this experience, this knowledge to you without expectation of payment. That being said, of course, these programs do cost money to put on, and so we appreciate if you can, if you are able. We know this is a tough time economically for a lot of people, but if you are able, if you could visit HellenicAmericanCC.org/donate. Again, that's HellenicAmericanCC.org/donate. Donate a couple dollars, $10, $15, whatever you can. But if you can't, please just feel free to enjoy this evening's webinar without feeling that you need to give anything. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube at a later date. So if you know someone who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't, feel free to pass that on to you. We'll send that out to the attendees afterward. Tonight, we're very pleased to bring you, this is our fall program, our lineup of webinars on the theme of immigration, migration, and life in the adopted country. And so this is the first of those webinars. This is our very first one, so bear with us. If we experience any technical difficulties, we'll be back shortly. We appreciate your patience. Tonight, we'll be having Demetrios Stavrakas is leading this webinar this evening. And before he gets started, I'd like to just introduce you to him a little bit if you do not know Dimitri. Born in Lefkada, Greece, Dimitri attended public grade and high school before immigrating to the United States in 1955 on a scholarship to McAllister College in St. Paul, Minnesota. In 1956, he moved to Washington, D.C. to continue his studies, graduating in 1961 from the American University with degrees in math and physics. Dimitri then continued in math and physics at the graduate level at American University and the University of Virginia. From 1963 to 1965, he taught math, physics, and astronomy at Montgomery College in Maryland and was the director of the planetarium there. In 1965, Dimitri joined NASA in the manned flight division of Goddard Space Flight Center, working on the Apollo moon landing project. In 1969, he joined the Federal Reserve, working in information management systems, where he officially retired early in 1987 to work as a private consultant. Dimitri provided consulting services in information management systems and telecommunications for 6 different US government departments, as well as local governments in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland. Some of his private industry clients included multinational companies such as Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, and AT&T, among others. Dimitri participated in many Washington, D.C. area organizations promoting the Greek American community and its useful and positive contributions to American society, including fundraising for churches and education. In 1963, Demetri co-founded the Reverend Thomas Daniels Parochial School in Washington, D.C. At that time, only 16 Greek parochial schools existed in the United States. In 1976, as chairman of the Ethnic Studies Committee of Montgomery and Prince George's counties, representing 21 ethnic minorities, he participated in a White House conference on ethnicity and education with 67 other participants from across the country. In 1974, he participated as Washington, D.C. community leader, promoting the cause and raising funds for the people of Cyprus. Demetri represented the Greek American community on the national level at a U.S. State Department Conference for Human Rights, where he defended the religious freedom of the Orthodox Patriarchate in Turkey. Demetrios Stavrakas has been listed in Marquis' Who's Who in the South and Southwest in 1971, Community Leaders in America in 1968, and the Dictionary of International Biography of London, England in 1970. He is very happy to be a member of the HACCM board since 2017. Demetri is happily married to his spouse, Christine, of 59 years, and they moved to Portland, Oregon in November of 2016. They have 4 children and 6 grandchildren, 2 of which reside here in Portland, Oregon. And with that, I'll turn it over to Demetri. Demetri, thanks so much for being here tonight. For those who are watching, there will be a Q&A feature here. If you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a little 2 bubbles that say Q&A, and you can submit questions there, and we will address those at the end. Demetri's got a space for that. But I'll let Demetri take it over, and Demetri, take it away.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Brandon. I'm sorry for the inconvenience with the technical difficulties. Well, tonight we're going to talk about the Greek immigrant experience, their hardship, discrimination they experienced, and their adjustment to the new country, and finally how they succeeded and triumphed. The topic tonight will in detail cover the early Greek immigration to America, what motivated the Greek immigrants to come to America, what were their experience while traveling to America, the transit through Ellis Island in New York. Then we will show a short Ellis Island documentary. Then we will see how they adapted and adjusted to the new life in America. Of course, they experienced exploitation, as well as discrimination in America. And in particular, they experienced social and job discrimination in many places in the country. Finally, they were accepted socially, and at the end, they succeeded in their effort to make a new life in this country, and they triumphed. At the end, we'll have a short session of questions and answers for the audience, and we'll continue. Among the known ancient sea people were the Etruscans, the Trojans, the Philistines, Mycenaeans, and Minoans. The Minoans traveled to Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and the Atlantic Ocean a long time ago. The Minoans came to America, according to Plutarch, around 86 AD, which is about 1400 years before Christopher Columbus came to America, and even well before then. They came to America from Carthage, which is the present-day Tunis in the country of Tunisia, to Lake Superior in Canada by going through the St. Lawrence Seaway to arrive at Lake Superior, and their purpose was to actually trade in copper. We know that from Plutarch, who lived in the 1st century BC, and he even wrote a book about it. And the title of the book is On the Apparent Face and the Orb of the Moon. Now, the first known person that we know that came to the United States was Theodoros Griego. He arrived in Florida in 1528 with Spaniard Narvaez from Santo Domingo with 600 Spaniards, Greeks, Portuguese, and Italians, according to a book published in 1532. It's a typographical error. Theodore Griego statue has been erected on the Clearwater Beach of Florida. Next came the New Smyrna, Florida Greek colony, which arrived exactly 8 years before they signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, so 1768. It was the largest colony to America when compared with the largest 3 known colonies, such as the Plymouth, Massachusetts, Jamestown, Virginia, and St. Mary's, Maryland. The next group of Greek immigrants were the 60 orphan children of the heroes of the 1821 Greek War of Independence. They came to this country between 1830 and 1860. They had been adopted by American Philhellenes. In fact, all of them were very successful, and one of them became the first Greek-American congressman in the state of Wisconsin in 1993. The evolution of the Immigration Act from August 3, 1882, effective 21, 1889, and through 1964 had a significant influence on the country of origin of the arriving immigrants. A very large number of Greek immigrants arrived to America beginning with 1880. It is estimated that from 1890 to 1910, about 375,000 Greek immigrants came to America. Now, the Immigration Act of 1882 had 2 main objectives. It imposed a real tax of 50 cents on every immigrant for the purpose of financing the operations of the Immigration Service. And then it was intended to exclude certain persons to enter the country and expel them for the following reasons. If a ship passenger was found to be a convict, lunatic, idiot, or any person unable to take care of him or herself without becoming a public charge, such person shall not be permitted to enter the country. The Immigration Act of 1924 established quotas based on the nationalities of persons present in U.S. according to the U.S. Census of 1890. The Act of 1952 abolished racial restrictions going back to the Naturalization Act of 1790. In 1790, colored people could not become citizens. At this time, in 1952, we have the people of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands become citizens of this country. The Immigration Act of 1965 redefined the quotas for the countries of origin. Here in Clearwater, Florida, we have the statue of Theodore Griego. What motivated the Greek immigrants to come to this country? Inability to find work at home, extreme poverty in many places in Greece with no hope for economic improvement, family obligations to provide a dowry for sisters in the family, desire to earn some money and come home later, have a better life, the great appeal of stories of former immigrants who succeeded in America, and who had national newspaper advertisements about the plethora of jobs with good pay in America that attracted the new immigrants. Well, here we saw scenes from a village life. Actually, it's a town, 1913, at the city of Paramithia. This is a butcher's market for selling meat. Here I have people from the city of Konica in 1913 in the fields with men and women present. In this place, at the Metsovo of Epirus in 1913, we have a young lady fetching water from the public water place to take it home. At the village of Kokinopulo in Elassona, Greece in 1913, we have a number of ladies primarily and some young children posing for this photograph in this neighborhood. At the time, there was a French tourist, we can call him, who actually went to Greece and visited these different places, and thanks to him, we have some of these pictures. Well, and here we have some men on the street of Andrichina in Peloponnesus in 1903. Andrichina is on the northwest corner of Arcadia, Greece, and Ellis, and formerly belongs to the province of Ellis, no more Elias. Here we have some market. At the market, we have some men at the market of the same town, Andrichina, Peloponnesus, in 1903. They came here to do their business, see friends, and discuss different business opportunities. What were their experiences traveling in America? Many immigrants could not afford the fare for the trip. They had to depend on some form of getting the money from a former immigrant or have the cost advanced for the trip to them by job agents who could advance the trip fare, as well as they'll have a job for them waiting when they arrive in the new country. The job agent was motivated by personal profit and the transaction, and he was also encouraged by employer companies because they had a great need for workers. In the early years of immigration, the immigrant travelers had to travel on relatively small and crowded ships with a list of accommodations for sanitary and safe travel. Well, it was in 1865 that the Steerage Passengers Act was passed because this situation of unsanitary conditions were very bad. And that act imposed on the owners of the shipping company to have a minimum space for each traveler of 18 square feet and at least one toilet for 100 persons. Some families had to travel with very young children who sometimes would get sick on their way to America, traveling during the cold winter months for a trip that lasted usually 12 to 15 days. The traveling immigrants were of many nationalities, speaking foreign languages, and they had to eat food on the ship that really was unfamiliar to them. Unless they had someone who was traveling from their own country with them, then they had no one to converse with. After a long and exhausting trip, they would arrive at Ellis Island in New York City, where they had to pass through a controlling station to determine their qualification to enter America. Here we have a number of boats where the immigrants were about to come to America. They had to get on the boat to get to the ocean liner, which was probably anchored a quarter of a mile from the pier because the water near the pier was not deep enough for the ocean liner to dock at the pier. And this is from the city of Patras, Greece. Here we have some immigrants traveling as steerage passengers to America on the SS Patricia in 1906. You can see how crowded the ship is, and you can imagine what unsanitary conditions that were prevailing on that ship. Here we have another scene of women resting on the deck of a ship traveling to America. As time went on, they built better Greek liners. So this one is Moraitis in 1907. These ships had three classes of passengers. They had the people that were the equivalent of steerage passengers, third class, second class, and first class. The transit through Ellis Island in New York. Between 1892 through 1954, at least 12 million immigrants arrived in Ellis Island before entering America. How long did it take to process the immigrants? Well, it could take from a couple of hours to 2 days or even 2 months if there were complications. Was every immigrant through Ellis Island approved to enter America? Of course not. About 2% of them were rejected. Reasons for rejection: inability for one to support oneself, unacceptable types of sickness, such as communicable diseases of public health significance, or HIV infection, infectious leprosy, and active tuberculosis, among others. However, the worst of all was trachoma, a highly contagious eye disease that would lead to blindness and death if not treated. Doctors had only a few seconds to examine the immigrants going through the line for as many as 60 diseases. Between 1900 and 1954, there were 3,500 deaths and 350 births there at Ellis Island. Once immigrants cleared the processing, they were allowed to enter the country, and they would proceed to the money exchange station at the island to exchange whatever they had, gold, silver, or foreign currency for American dollars. At this time, we'll proceed to display on the screen a short documentary about the Ellis Island processing experience. This is the Ellis Island facility, and this is the building where the immigrants have to go through for processing before entering the country at New York City Harbor.
An estimated 40% of Americans are descended from immigrants that passed through Ellis Island. That's a lot of Americans. The first Ellis Island immigration station opened on January 1st, 1892 in New York Harbor to manage the increasing number of migrants coming to America. In that first year, a record number of nearly 450,000 people passed through to enter the United States. By the time Ellis Island closed in 1954, that number had reached 12 million, although most of those people arrived by 1924. Migrants fleeing poverty and persecution or just looking to start a new life traveled by private steamship from Eastern and Southern Europe. Voyages could take 1 to 2 weeks. Ships divided passengers by wealth and class. First and second class passengers slept in staterooms and cabins while everyone else stayed in a space at the bottom of the ship called steerage. Steerage passengers paid around $30 per ticket, but steamship companies would sell as many tickets as they could. First and second class passengers paid even more. Because of this, steerage was often overcrowded and unsanitary, with shared sleeping compartments and no privacy. But hopeful immigrants stuck it out, believing it would be worth it for a chance to live in the United States. When ships finally arrived in New York Harbor, health officers boarded and looked for signs of disease before anyone was allowed to disembark. Healthy first and second class passengers were processed on the spot and allowed to enter the United States without setting foot on Ellis Island. Everyone else waited, sometimes for days, for small ferries to take them to the immigration station for processing. Migrants walked down the gangplank with all of their belongings and dropped their bags in the baggage room on the ground floor. They then continued up a winding staircase to the registry room, which was upstairs for a reason. Doctors stood on the second floor and watched each person climb the stairs for signs of health problems. The registry room, nearly 20,000 square feet with 56-foot-tall vaulted ceilings, was nicknamed the Great Hall for its size. It was here that most migrants' fate would be decided. The first step to entry was a 6-second physical exam by a uniformed doctor. Anyone considered a risk to public health was marked with a piece of chalk and taken out of the line to be examined further. Marks were given for everything from signs of mental illness to trachoma, a contagious eye infection that could eventually blind up to 3/4 of those infected. Those who cleared the medical exam went on to a legal inspection. Passengers were checked against a manifest from the ship they arrived on and asked 29 identifying questions, often with the help of an interpreter. If their answers didn't match the information on the manifest, things like their name, occupation, and country of origin, they could be detained. The legal interviews could take as little as 2 minutes, and the vast majority of people passed through with ease and were allowed to enter the country after being issued landing cards with their name, often misspelled, and destination. For others, the stay on Ellis Island was considerably longer. The few who were detained for either medical or legal reasons could be on the island overnight or for months. Once their records were finally reviewed, they would either be admitted to the U.S. or sent back to the country they came from, free of charge. But only 2% of the 12 million immigrants processed at Ellis Island were deported in this way. After inspection, everyone continued down a staircase with 3 aisles. Those being detained walked down the center aisle, those entering New York City or headed north walked down the left, and those traveling west or south walked down the right. At the bottom was a post office, a rail ticket office, and a place to change money. For some, family waiting to greet them, and for all, a new life in America.
Here we have the immigrants through the processing center at the final clearing station. Now they just clear the processing station and they are on their way to the boat to get to New York City Harbor. Here we have them traveling on the boat to the harbor of New York City. Adaptation and adjustment. The new life in America for most of the immigrants was a big surprise. The physical environment for most of the immigrants living in big cities was totally new and very busy compared to their previous living experiences, since most of them came from small villages. 2 typical village photos will be shown later, where life was quiet and slow when compared to the busy and crowded life in the big cities. Their neighbors spoke in many foreign languages unfamiliar to them. They had great difficulty to go shopping at the store, selling a great number of canned goods labeled in a foreign language. They longed for their own family members, since most of the immigrants were not married. Many of them did not have access to attend a Greek Orthodox church in many cities. Unless another Greek family lived in the same apartment building or in the same neighborhood, every one of their neighbors was a total stranger. At a time, as time went on, they became familiar with the new language, so they could go shopping, carry out their work tasks, meet some of their neighbors, and have their children play and attend schools with the other kids in the neighborhood. Here's an example of simple life at the street in Edessa in 1908. Edessa is in the province of Macedonia, actually region of Macedonia. Here's another simple village life at Baja, Jagoria, Epirus, Greece of 1913. Now we have a busy life at the New York City Lower East Side. The picture was taken in 1890. Not only the street is very busy, but at night, the congested street had to also be clean because there was a lot of trash on that street at the end of the day. Here we have a photo of a particular crowded sweatshop. In this case, here they make pants. It's in New York City and it was taken in 1937. You can see the man on the left side working, the woman on the right side working, and the foreman here wants to make sure no one can even take a 1 minute of rest. They wanted to be working continuously. Because housing arrangements were very scarce and expensive, some people had to live in rear apartment rooms at a store, anywhere. In this case, 193 Manhattan Avenue. This picture was taken in 1935. This picture is from the Municipal City Archives. Here we have a family at the kitchen table at the tenement of 1935, where they're having breakfast. As you can see, because some of the rooms didn't have any windows, in this particular case where I have the arrow pointing, there appears to be the shape of a window, but it's really an opening like a window. And this place here is a shaft where they forced air through to give the impression that the air is fresh air from the outside. And this is probably in the middle of the building. Exploitation. That's what they experienced, the new Greek immigrants in the new country during the early 20th century. This type of experience was common among the Greeks, the Italians, the Chinese, and the Japanese immigrants. Exploitation was in two forms, the job agent and the padrone system. The job agent. An early arrived immigrant who knew the English language reasonably well would negotiate with the employer directly to bring him employees, and then he will get paid as a job finder's fee at regular pay periods, even before the employer received his own pay. And this would go on for a long time, months and even years. At times, this, let's say, commission of the job agent amounted to 25 to 40% of the employer's pay. Some of these job agents would recruit new employees even overseas by placing ads in local newspapers and by advancing the cost for the trip fare and guaranteeing a new job upon arrival to the new country. The padrone system, also managed in Italian, or really godfather, even in Spanish is called El Padrino. It would involve an earlier arrived immigrant being familiar with the English language and the job market, who would act as a protector and advisor to the newcomer immigrant on just about all activities for a large employment fee. It worked for jobs at railroad companies and coal mine companies. The Padrone Act of 1874 attempted to discontinue this practice, but finally managed to make it extinct by 1930. In fact, in one particular case, there was a Padrone company, which was known as the Six Companies. This was a Chinese Padrone company who managed within 25 years to bring 160,000 Chinese to this country. The Padrones usually would exploit the newcomer for years, and they would discourage them from trying to survive independently. In fact, many of these Padrones would exploit young teenage immigrants. For many years, as shoeshine boys in the big cities of Philadelphia, Chicago, and New York. Some persons had the negative image of this system, thinking that immigrants were viewed as powerless slaves, and they were too stupid to take care of themselves. Others thought Padrones were helpful patrons of the immigrants. They were advocates of them, found jobs for them, and even facilitate many times to send money to the home country for them. Here I have a picture of shoeshine boys in New York City. Discrimination in America. Original discrimination in America took place early in the 1700s, when there was an anti-Irish and anti-Catholic discrimination. Later, the discrimination appeared to be a scientifically justified practice. Joseph Arthur, a French count, around 1853-55, wrote an essay on the intellectual differences of the three human races, namely white, black, and yellow. Saint Francis Gaston, a cousin of Charles Darwin, in 1883 coined the term eugenics, which means well-born, or as the Greeks would say for a person in eugenics in aposoid. Thus, we have an established scientific justification for Nordicism, the new doctrine of superiority of the Nordic race, which is really the white race. They intended to protect its purity by discriminating and limiting social interaction with other races. In fact, they thought the Nordics were superior even of all the white people, and not necessarily all the members of the Caucasian race were included in them. For example, people that were excluded from the white race were Southern, Eastern Europeans, and Balkan people, and they were considered by the Americans as not white people. As late as in 1948, a Greek-American college student during a discussion about the race in his class, raised the question, "I am Greek. To what race do I belong?" None of his classmates volunteered to provide an answer. The main legacy of the birth of eugenics was a record of practicing eugenics by selective sterilization of feeble-minded people in the USA, Alberta, Canada, the Scandinavian countries, and later in Germany. The main legacy of the birth of eugenics was a record of practicing eugenics by selective sterilization of feeble-minded people in the USA, Canada, and Nazi Germany and Scandinavia. Academicians and lawyers promoted this theory of scientifically justified racism to justify social discrimination against many immigrants in order to maintain the purity of the white American Protestant society. The movement received substantial funding from the Carnegie Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the Harriman Railroad Fortune. By 1910, scientists and professionals formed the American Breeders Association, the first eugenic body in the US to investigate and report on heredity in the human race and emphasize the value of superior blood and the menace to society of inferior blood. Its membership included Alexander Graham Bell and David Starr Jordan, the president of Stanford University, among others. By 1930, I know that in California alone, there was as many as 10,000 sterilizations. A legally supported discrimination was provided also by the Exploitation Act of March 1907, which decreed that if an American woman married a non-citizen, she was no longer an American citizen and she could be subject to deportation. If her husband applied for naturalization, then she would have to apply separately to have her citizenship restored. If she left the country, she would be subject to the quota of immigrants of the foreign country of her residence. Her employment opportunities would also be restricted for federal employment everywhere and for public teaching in some states. In 1922, the Cable Act negated the Exploitation Act. In fact, during the month of September, I believe the Oregon Historical Society had an article about a particular lady living in Portland, Oregon, who around 1918, I think she married a German immigrant and she lost her citizenship. And she didn't get it back until 1922. Social and job discrimination of Greek immigrants. Earlier arrived immigrants had their own reasons for discriminating newcomer immigrants, such as the presence of criminal elements among some of the new immigrants encouraged the local people to continue to discriminate and having no dealings with them. Poverty among the new immigrants. The different dress codes of the new immigrants did not facilitate social tolerance in many American communities. In some cases, some undesirable personal experiences of some persons with the new immigrants were applicable to all immigrants. Newly arrived Greek immigrants were used more than once, in fact, quite a few times, as strike breakers by a few American employers. In July 1922, AHEPA, the American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association, was founded in Atlantic, Georgia. Its goal was to have the Greek immigrants to become socially adjusted in America, and second, to confront the discrimination of the KKK against the Greek immigrants. The KKK discriminated against Black persons and white persons, as well as such as Catholics, Jews, and other foreign immigrants, including Greek Americans. The new immigrants were perceived as a threat to their own welfare for their own various perceived reasons. In some elections, the supporters of KKK, disregarding anyone, and with great courage, dared to distribute cards to the voters, announcing to all, and I'm using their own words, when cotton grows on the fig tree and alfalfa hangs on the rose, When the aliens run the United States and the Jews grow a straight nose, when the Pope is praised by everyone and the land of Uncle Sam, and the Greek is elected president, then Ku Klux Klan wouldn't be worth a damn. We'll continue on social and job discrimination of Greek immigrants. Some Greek immigrants experienced unique and unacceptable discrimination treatment. The Greek town right of South America, Nebraska, on February 21, 1909, was the largest social discrimination in the history of the United States that was directed against a single ethnic group of people. According to the New York Times, about 3,000 men killed one boy, displaced the entire population of a Greek town, and looted homes and burned down the Greek town. This resulted in the expelling of almost 2,200 Greeks and burning most of the Greek-owned businesses. In addition, this riot attracted or generated another riot in Kansas City, where 50 Greeks were attacked by a mob of 600, and another one in Dayton, Ohio. The Ludlow, Colorado massacre of April 14, 1914. The Colorado National Guard and the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, soldiers and policemen, assaulted 1,200 striking miners, using machine guns against the colony. About 21 people among the miners' families were killed, including some wives and 11 minor children. Louis Tikas from Crete, Greece, the leader of the miners, while he was going back and forth to bring peace between both sides, he was shot in the back and was killed by the National Guard that protected the mine of John D. Rockefeller, the family patriarch, who was the richest man in America at that time. Their sacrifice is the deadliest strike in the United States. The House investigated massacre, and its 1915 House report influenced the promotion of child labor laws and an 8-hour workday. The United Mine Workers of America built a granite monument on the site, and the Ludlow Tent Colony site was designated as a National Historic Landmark. In the state of Rhode Island, Greeks were excluded to work in 21 different occupations by state regulations. In 1920, the Greeks of the state of Utah were eyewitnesses to KKK prejudice against them. When a Greek was married to an American-born woman, they burned the cross in front of his store, and they burned the house of his father-in-law. In Florida, the personal experience of a person named Chris Locas demonstrates a typical conduct of KKK supporters toward the Greeks. On July 8, 1921, 3 cars loaded with KKK supporters drove to his restaurant. 3 of them handed him a note stating, "You are an undesired citizen. You do not obey the federal laws for sale of alcoholic beverages, and you conduct yourself with a proper social behavior. You are a shame to society. A few trains leave every day from Pensacola, Florida. You can choose one of them to depart the city, but you do not have much time." In 1923, a restaurant in San Francisco had a sign on the front window stating, "We have no rats and no Greeks." Here's the monument that was erected by the United Mine Workers of America in Ludlow, Colorado, for the massacre that took place on April 20, 1914. Factors that contributed to the reversal of social discrimination, and that's the Greek Americans who are socially acceptable. The founding of AHEPA, American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association, in 1922, tried to assist the assimilation of the Greek Americans with the American society. Its purpose was Americanization of the Greek community, as well as cultivation and support of Greek ethnic traditions and culture. Once the modification of Nordicism by the German Aryans took place, most people in this country tried to disassociate themselves with such social discrimination. Many Greek Americans Americanized their names and preferred to speak in English rather than in Greek. The Greek American generation create business establishments, graduate from American colleges and universities, and excel in their professions. The mixed marriages and the extended use of the English language had a definite impact to the increased acceptance of the Greeks by the American society. They have Greek grocery shops, coffee shops, restaurants, and hundreds of Greek Orthodox churches for Sunday worship with their families. They began to live in a very pleasant life in the new world, which they call home. When the sons of immigrants from Greece fought side by side with American soldiers during the Second World War, the social discrimination began to disappear. Here we have two Greek coffee shops next to each other. The Greeks would like to go there after work in the evening or on Sundays, or Saturdays and Sundays, if they had the Saturday off. They drink their preferred Greek coffee and chat with each other. Here we have an example of a Greek restaurant in a southern city in 1930. As you can see, they accepted everyone for customers. Now we have Mr. Chaconas of Washington, D.C. at his grocery store in 1915. The location of this place was at the Federal Triangle, which is right now, I would say it's near the current FBI building or across the street from the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. A group of successful Greek Americans are having a good time. Success and triumph. The Greek Orthodox Church of America contributed substantially to the projection of the Greek American image in our society. On November 1st, 1948, President Harry Truman provided Air Force One to take the newly elected patriarch to his new see in Istanbul, Turkey, to assume his new church-assigned duties. The factor that influenced the most the American public opinion for a better social image of Greek Americans was the courage and heroism of the Greek army in 1940 in Albania while fighting the Italians, and later in Thrace and Macedonia in the defense of Greece against the Germans. The Greek Americans achieved great political success in Congress with a good number of elected senators and House representatives. When Michael Dukakis in the 1988 elections became the candidate of the Democratic Party for the office of the President of the United States, the Greek Americans were very proud to share his success at their own crowning achievement. In conclusion, the Greeks in this country have come a long way since 100 years ago. Thank you. Now we have a few minutes. We can ask a few questions. I'll raise some questions and then you can raise some of your own. And we'll try to answer them. Is there any discrimination of immigrants here in the US today? Is there any discrimination of immigrants in Greece? How we can minimize the intensity of this social discrimination against newcomer immigrants here and abroad? What do you think about these issues? Do you have any of your own questions? Tolerance and acceptance of newcomers needs to be encouraged and be accommodated with reasonable expectations. Brandon?
Yes, thank you, Dimitri, so much for that. That was just informative and so wonderful. We appreciate all the time and energy you've put into that. For the folks who are joining us on Zoom, if you would like to submit a question via the Q&A feature, if you take your cursor and move to the bottom of your screen or to the bottom of the Zoom window, there should be a button there labeled Q&A, question and answer. It's got two sort of chat bubbles as the icon. Click on that. You could submit your questions that way. In the interim, Dimitri, feel free. Why don't you tackle one of these questions that you've raised yourself?
Well, let's see. In the United States today, there is still many elements of discrimination, and it is not a coincidence at this time we live through the experience of Black Lives Matter. In fact, discrimination is practiced also against some other ethnic immigrants to this country. And of course, the majority of the people would like to believe that this is not acceptable. Now, when it comes to the situation in Greece, I would say most of the people who are directly affected by the new immigrants, they do experience, but not everyone, some kind of discrimination against the newcomers. And of course, there's the case of if there's too much pressure from the newly arrived immigrants or illegal immigrants, some people they actually feel uncomfortable. That's why they complain. On the other hand, if the burden was distributed throughout the country, it'd be less burdensome and also it would be better accepted. Now, the third question, how we can minimize the intensity of the social discrimination against newcomer immigrants here and abroad? Well, first of all, most of the people in this country, all the white people, have been immigrants at one time or another. Their forefathers were immigrants. Only the American Indian people are the natives of this country. Therefore, somehow there's a built-in resistance or lack of receptivity of the newcomer immigrant. And if we think that the newcomer immigrants came to this country as well as the old immigrants for the same purpose, to improve their lives, then we should try to be more accommodating and reasonable and try to find ways to live and coexist with them. Now, I would like to hear your comments and ideas. Brandon?
We have a question here from Mary, who's asking, what was your own experience like as a Greek immigrant to the United States?
Okay, well, first of all, I came as a foreign student. And of course, from here and there and some places, I had the experience of being discriminated. But I had the capability to live with it and actually adjust to it and overcome it. And usually later, after I graduated from college, the people were more educated and they were less discriminant to me. So I managed it.
Yeah, Steph has a question for you as well. And the question is, and this is a very similar question, but I'm wondering if you might get into some of the specifics. When you first moved to the United States, did you experience discrimination? How did you respond? And would you respond differently today, knowing what you know now?
When I experienced discrimination, most of the time, I expected that. So I tried to respond as reasonably as I can. Now, if I experience discrimination, I feel comfortable enough to even lecture the person to not discriminate. So I don't have any problems. I can live with it, and I can try to let's say, educate the person, hopefully to change his attitude towards me and other people, because we live in the same country.
Dimitri, I'm wondering if you know of, thinking of discrimination, especially for these early Greek immigrants, and indeed immigrants of all backgrounds, how did the discrimination affect perhaps where these groups of immigrants ended up geographically? Why did they end up in the areas the cities and the regions they ended up in terms of immigration? Did it have anything to do with the discrimination, or was it sometimes in despite of that discrimination?
Well, there were two basic reasons. One reason was they, let's say, gathered together in the big cities because some people from their own hometown or from other places in Greece happened to be there. So they felt more comfortable to be among Greeks. So because of that, in some cities, there were so many of them. They formed what they call usually a Greek town in New York, Greek town in Baltimore, Chicago, and so on. And there also they felt more comfortable if they had difficulty with employment, being among their own people, they had more opportunities to get access to some employment opportunities. Those are the two reasons. But once the Greeks had improved their life, they had their own businesses, they built churches, they had their own social life, they felt very comfortable, as if they were living in their own country.
Well, thank you for that, Dimitri. Katina asks, first she says, thank you for the great presentation. And she's wondering if you can answer specifically what kind of discrimination did you experience? Folks are obviously very interested in your own personal story as an immigrant.
Okay. Now I have to use this example because the funniest thing to me, the most discrimination I've ever experienced was one time. I had been working at the Federal Reserve for a year and a half. And I have been among professional people all my life. So one of my colleagues in my office, there were 18 people. He asked me, Demetrios, you're a Greek. How come you did not open a restaurant? So I lost no time to reply to him politely and to take care of it. I said, I didn't because I want you to open a kosher delicatessen. I want you to give you a chance to open a kosher delicatessen. He got embarrassed and he walked away.
That's an interesting anecdote. Yeah. So Mary had a follow-up question for you, which was what led you to settle here in Portland, Oregon after Washington, D.C.?
Okay, basically, I've spent, my wife was born in Washington, D.C., and I've spent 60 years in Washington, D.C. But my son had a need for our support at home to take care. They had two young children. Both my daughter-in-law and my son are very busy with their jobs, and I thought it would be helpful. And also, they wanted their children to grow up with grandparents because my son grew up with my wife's father. So he loved the family life where there were three generations in the house. That's how we moved here.
Great. You had a comment from Athena saying, doesn't have a question, but wished to comment. Her father and his brother immigrated to the United States in 1913 to avoid conscription into the Turkish army. At that time in Asia Minor, the Turkish army took Christians 18 years or older to serve in the Turkish army. It's interesting. Do you know, like, what was there? I imagine there was a significant number of Greeks who from Asia Minor who immigrated to the United States, and was conscription into the Turkish army a significant reason for that?
Well, that factor for very few, it was the cause, let's say, for immigrating. Very, very few. The majority of them came after the 1922 catastrophe and burning of Smyrna, because at that time the Turks forced all the Greeks to leave Turkey. About the 1923 Lausanne Agreement between Turkey and Greece, there was an exchange of populations. About 1,650,000 Greeks left Asia Minor, and about 365,000 Turks left Greece to go to Turkey. So that was the time. Most of the Asia Minor immigrants in this country came after 1922.
Thanks, Dimitri, for answering that. Another question from the Q&A. What motivated you to explore Greek American history? And how did academic Greek American studies shape your understanding of that history?
Well, actually, what happened was from the beginning, when I came to this country, and later I went to Washington, D.C., I was involved in the community life of the church there, one of the two church communities, St. Constance and Helen, and I was involved with the Greek Americans extensively. So then I thought I would serve them better if I became familiar with the life of the new immigrants in this country and their children and grandchildren. And in fact, because of that, over the years, I have studied immigration of Greeks everywhere. For example, the last two waves of immigration to the United States was between 1960 and 1972, where over 100,000 Greeks came to this country. However, because the financial situation in Greece was not very good, Greece experienced what they call the brain drain. 450,000 Greeks, most of them educated, left Greece. All of those, 3,500 between 2010 and 2015, they came to the United States. But most of them came as medical doctors or with PhDs to work with scientific companies.
Thanks, Dimitri. Theodora asks a question. Having grown up in the Washington, D.C. area, I would know what Greek and Orthodox organizations you were involved in there. So sort of what organizations might you have been involved in that Theodora might be familiar with, having grown up in?
Okay, for example, the major organizations were the Greek Orthodox Youth of America, XON, one of them at a young age before I got married. Another one was the AHEPA, that you are familiar with from the presentation. Another one was the Hellenic Center, which is a group of Greek American organizations. But one of the best ones there was the literary organization of Prometheus, one of the best in the country, where we discuss all kinds of topics on politics, domestic and foreign in this country and overseas, poetry, literature, and social issues. And then you have many local organizations there, the Hellenic Society, the Macedonian Society, the Cretan Society, of large regions of Greece. So right now there are at least 12, 13 organizations there. And I had to meet and know all of them. And I'm very familiar with what they do and what they try to accomplish. And therefore, of course, they have many social functions like dances or celebrations. And for example, there's one particular group, the Laconians, whenever they have a dance once a year on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, they attract 800 people. And most of them are young people between 18 and 35, 40.
Great. Helen McClure asks, what do you think of the resurgence of Greek Americans whose parent or grandparent born in Greece who are now seeking Greek citizenship / an EU passport? This is per a New York Times article from just last month in September.
Well, there are probably two reasons. One of them may be, number one, their desire to obtain Greek citizenship. So when they go to Europe, they feel like they're citizens of the European community. And of course, when they go to Greece, they feel at home, literally, because they are Greek citizens. The other is sometimes some of them, if they have some bad experience here, they say, oh, I think I will renew my attachment to Greece. And they do so by just becoming citizens. Or they travel very frequently to Greece in the summer.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a definite perk.
That's right, yes.
Passport eases that along a little bit.
Yes.
Sure. Nicholas asks, I'm curious what you think of anti-discrimination policies in the U.S. corporate world that are meant to protect minorities such as people from Spanish and Portuguese speaking communities that end up covering and protecting fellow Mediterraneans against discrimination that at times can affect folks that herald from other parts of Southern Europe, especially if they have still have long names and perhaps an accent.
Well, I have had the opportunity when I was at the Federal Reserve, worked for about 2 years on equal employment opportunity cases where there was discrimination primarily theoretically among the Black people and the American Indians, but also anybody else. So I'm familiar with what was going throughout the country because I was responsible to provide the actual picture at the Federal Reserve, if there was or there was not any discrimination, and also provide enough documentation to the judge if there was a legal case so that they will take care of it. Now, it is true, you have discrimination. Number one, discrimination is men discriminate against women in many professions. We know that. Even you have discrimination in promotions and assigning ladies to responsible positions, and they could advance just as well as men. Some women are even better than men in some jobs. But I guess it's the individual. And of course, in some cases, the company could be actually quietly advancing that discrimination. Basically, it's the human beings. If someone is here, was born here, and so on, feels someone who's a newcomer, or he doesn't deserve to have every opportunity I have. So I discriminate. When he's about to be promoted, I slow him down. It's not acceptable, but it's happening.
Sure, absolutely. So another question here from Steph. For those Greeks who immigrated over the past 120 years, was discrimination used as a factor to determine whether certain immigrants could travel to selective major cities and not others? How were Greek refugees from the Greek Revolutionary War and the first colonists selected to be placed in certain areas in the US and the Western Hemisphere?
No, I don't think at any one time they forced anyone to reside in a particular place. Once you came to this country, if you had a job or you knew someone that would assist you to move anywhere, you could do that. I didn't experience any kind of discrimination of that kind, and I'm not aware of any type of discrimination of that type, as far as physical location, selection of the city where to live in, for any type of immigrant.
So you noted in your presentation, Dimitri, that one of the factors pushing Greeks to immigrate, and everywhere as well, not just Greece, but specifically Greece, was economic, was Greeks coming to the United States either because economic possibility at home wasn't very great, or because they had responsibilities for dowries for sisters and other relatives. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the gendered wave in terms of it? My understanding is that men typically came over with large groups large communities of Greek men that had very few Greek women. And can you talk a little bit about that? And then what ended up having Greek women and then coming over?
Right. Well, at the beginning, actually, early in 1890s, 1900, after 1910, 1920, you had mostly men coming to this country for two reasons. So one of them was the men felt the need financially to live, to be able to survive, even in Greece, to make some money, go back. In fact, 9 out of 10 of them at that time, they thought they would come here, work for a few years, get money, and go back. So they weren't thinking about getting married or anything until they got back to their country, and usually to their own village. Well, as time went on, of course, after 1923, when there was the exchange of populations, the life in Greece was miserable because you had about 40% of the population added, an additional 40% to the current population. Greece had about 2.5 million, and you had about 1.4 million added to the population. So the number of jobs almost disappeared. So the financial hardship was even more intense. So they had to come here. But once they came here and they succeeded, or relatively felt more comfortable 5, 10, 20 years later, then they thought they want to make it their life here in the United States. So they thought they were going to get married. So that's the time where some of them in the very early years, 1920s and 30s, many Greeks from here would send the money to a prospective bride. For example, his father or his brothers and relatives would select the girl, or he was, let's say, familiar with the girl he wanted to marry. So he would send the fare, and the girl would come here to marry him. And at one time, I remember they made a movie, The Greek Brides. The whole ship of single women came to the U.S. to get married. But there were some locations, like the New England factories where they primarily employed women, while elsewhere they were mostly men. So then they found out if they could somehow get there and meet some of the women, then it would be better to socialize and get married and form a family.
Very different experience of marriage,
Yes.
from today, for sure.
Oh, yes.
Madeline has more of a comment than a question, and I think it's a nice sentiment here. This says, my mother's father came to the United States from, and I'm really sorry. So I'm, as Demetri knows, I'm actually not Greek, and so I'm still learning my Greek pronunciation.
Yes.
So my mother's father came to the U.S. from Agios Georgios near Lavadia, Greece, in 1909, and departed from Patras. I know he traveled with other young men from his village because I saw their names on the ship's manifest I located. One went back to Greece and married one of my grandfather's sisters. The photo you showed of the men getting on the small boats in Patras in order to reach large transatlantic ships gives me more information on what he did to get here, and thank you.
Okay, well, basically, even as late as 1950s, the two Italian ships, there were three, I forgot about the third one, Vulcania and Saturnia. What they will do, they will try to gather passengers from the eastern coast of Italy, and then they will stop at Patras, pick up Greek passengers, and then go to the Messina states of Sicily, the last stop. And then from there, they'll go usually either straight to New York or to Halifax, Canada, to drop some people in Canada, and then in the United States.
Thank you, Demetri, and thank you for your time this evening. We appreciate the knowledge and experience you've brought and shared with us. It's 8:15, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. But again, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you'd like to share before we wrap the webinar up tonight?
No, really, I want to say I thank the audience for giving me the opportunity to share with them some facts about the experience of the early Greek immigrants. But it is true that at this time, we have, let's say, as a Greek American community, arrived, have been successful, and now what's facing the Greek American community is how our community will be contributing to the American society for the next 50 and 100 years, and what will be our image by that time. And it's up to us to really to be productively contributing to the American society so that we feel at home and they feel pleased that we share with them the fruits of our labor and contributions. Thank you. I thank everybody who attended the session. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you, Demetri. It's been a pleasure. We do have a few housekeeping sort of announcements here at the end before we close out the webinar. Just a reminder, you might have seen in the slideshow before we started that our next webinar is in about a month on November 21st. It will be at 11 a.m. and that is with former Athens City Councilwoman Yvette Jarvis. And Yvette is bringing a perspective that is on this theme of immigration, migration, and life in the adopted country, rather than it being a story of a Greek or Greeks coming to the United States. It's going to be a story about someone from the United States, an American, immigrating to Greece and making a life there. And so we're excited to have Yvette join us. If you want to sign up for that, you can do that tonight. And that's at Hellenic-American-CC.org/events/Yvette-Jarvis. And I'll put that link down in the chat below for you to find, as well as the link. Again, I want to remind you that if you do have the means and the ability right now, we know it's a tough time, but if you can support these webinars with financial support, we would appreciate it. Just a few dollars. You know, there's over 40 people on this webinar tonight. So if everybody chips in a few dollars that can, you know, that's something significant and helps us put these programs on for you. And so thanks so much to everybody who attended tonight. I'll bring back up that slideshow and I'll put those links down in the comments. So thanks so much and have a lovely evening.